Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Edith Shiro, a licensed clinical psychologist, an expert in trauma and healing. She's the author of the powerful book, The Unexpected Gift of Trauma, a co-founder of the Trauma and Resilience Center in Miami. Dr. Shiro has spent years working with people who have experienced deep pain, from personal trauma to community tragedy. Dr. Shiro's missions resonates deeply with ours. Learn that safety is not just about physical protection, but about nurturing the whole student's mind, body, and spirit. Eddie, thank you very much for being here today.
It's an honor to be here with you for the invitation.
Talk to us about the healing and trauma.
You know, I've been working as a clinical psychologist for 30 years and more, and every day I learn from the people that I work with, individuals, couples, families, communities, and groups that are going through a lot of pain and suffering. Mm-hmm. And what's amazing to me is how people that really want to transform their experiences, they go through a process and a journey to really change and heal and understand what happened to them for a purpose. You know, I always see there are different kinds of people, the ones that go through trauma and they suffer and they stay in that victim place of suffering. There are people that recover, that are resilient, that move, that bounce back. And then there are the people that really bounce forward. They really grow from what happens to them. They really transform and learn from the experiences that happen to them. And that's what I call post-traumatic growth. So I'm so honored to be talking about this and to be seeing this healing process in people that I do every day.
So let me ask you something, because I think we are all survivors of trauma. I lived trauma in my life, many traumatic situations, and many more that may be trauma for somebody, but not necessarily is a trauma for you. My late dad used to say that it's difficult for a person who has been blind all his life to describe darkness because he haven't never been able to see the light. And I give you a perfect advice. A perfect example is for me. I grew up without my mom, all just by my dad, but that was normal for me. Yeah. That wasn't a trauma necessarily. Yes. So talk to us a little bit about that process of healing, that process of going through trauma and making you a better human being.
And you know, your example of being blind to what you don't know, sometimes is the very thing that causes people to react and behave in a certain way. And you say, well, but this is normal for me. But you really see a little bit further and you say, it's coming from a more early trauma that people have gone through, that you have suffered, that you don't even realize that is dictating how you respond to things in life. So we have trauma responses, and we have ways in which we constantly need to protect ourselves from danger, from emotional danger, from physical danger, from the discomfort of something that is happening, from pain. And we know how to navigate that because we are wired in our bodies to respond to trauma and respond to danger.
You don't contextualize it properly.
And you don't even realize that what you're doing is what your normal response to being in survival mode is not necessarily so normal or not necessarily so typical, because there are people that are not in survival mode. There are people that are in thriving mode. There are people that are not constantly defending against danger or defending against pain or threat.
Are you describing PTSD right now? Because that's familiar for me. I think yes. Every human being, you don't necessarily need to go to a war to have PTSD. I've been in a war, and I can tell you what the PTSD related to that is so similar to some other PTSD, things that happen in your life, many things. I mean, I think divorce can be a PTSD, being left alone by your parents, the death of a parent or a family member can produce PTSD.
So, but let me define a little bit more what trauma is, because, you know, people always ask me, but before I even talk about healing, let me define what trauma is. Let me see if you can identify with this. And this is my own definition that is a little bit more expanded than just you're a soldier coming from war. Okay, that's where originally the word trauma was applied to, emotional trauma, and then what developed the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. But I want to expand this concept a little bit more. Trauma is anything that happens to you that shatters or shakes your belief system for which you don't have the tools to deal with, that you don't have the tools to confront. Anything that you believe in about yourself, about the other, about the world, but that shatters, that really shakes you and says, what? Am I living through this? I can't even believe it. It breaks something in you in some way, like how you understand the world, what you believe in. If you were a person that believed in marriage your whole life and all of a sudden you're divorced, that can be traumatic. So it's not the same for you that it's for me, that it's for the other person, because each of us our own way of deciding what is traumatic for us and what is not. Maybe me going through changing countries might not be so traumatic, and for somebody else it might be.
Correct. I can attest to that. Remember when we moved to the United States, the change by itself. I was so used to, because I emigrated to Israel first, but then when I have to emigrate again, do it to the United States, it's different, completely different. You have kids, you have a wife, you have things. You're not alone.
Exactly.
Talk to us about how this affects a child, because we see. I'm a big proponent of completely banning the participation trophies and awards for kids, because you are, in my opinion, you are robbed them of the opportunity to learn what failure is, which is part of life. You have to fail in order to succeed. And if we rob, in my opinion, if we rob kids out of that possibility, that opportunity to experience that, you are growing adults who will very ill prepared to deal with failure.
Right. So when we go through difficult experiences in childhood and we don't have the adult that is there to guide in some way the failure, because it's not so much about not giving the trophy or failing, is what do you do with that, right? Because if you don't do the trophy for everybody and you let the kids fail, but you don't work that in a way that really is a learning experience, you've done nothing. So I want to push it even further. What you're saying, at a next step, it's not just don't give trophies to all the kids, let them fail, but do something with that, meaning be the adult, just be, the parent, the teacher, the mentor, the coach.
Contextualizing
Exactly, that gives the child the opportunity, says, okay, I see that you're suffering. I see you're sad because you lost. I see that you're crying because you failed. Validate that and then allow for that learning opportunity. Because if what you're allowing the kid to fail and what you do with that kid is to punish them or not to even open for the possibility of expressing the emotion, you've done nothing. Let's take it more from even an earlier stage.
Okay.
One of the traumas that I haven't mentioned is not just an event that happens, but it's a chronic experience of not having an acceptance, a basic acceptance of who you are. If a child grows up in an environment that has no connection to the parent, that has no validation for who they are, that everything that they do is conditioned. If you do this, then you'll get, food or you'll be accepted. Understanding of who they are is very fragile and very vulnerable. You see what I mean? Because there's not like foundation of like support that says, I accept you for who you are. I love you for who you are. You can have a space in this home to talk about how you feel, to talk about your fears. When you don't have any of that, and you have an ongoing childhood, let's say, of parents that are absent, because the parents are much more absent these days, parents that don't communicate well because everybody is
Parents that expect the school to raise the kids,
also,
which is the school is to their function is to instruct, not to raise your kids.
but it's not just the school. It's the school and the internet and the social media and the video games. The Gen Z generation, I would say Gen X, Gen Z, and the Alpha and Beta were already in those generations.
Okay.
If you know, they have been raised with internet and social media and video games that have really informed interactions, have informed
The
relationships.
access to information that they have is amazing.
Yeah, but it allows, it makes them learn how to talk to people. What is the right and what is wrong? How do you communicate? So more than a parent that is present, more than a community that is present, more than the interaction with the other human being, there are all these other virtual realities that are informing these kids now. So it's a very complicated combination of not having the presence of an adult and having all these other virtual realities happening at the same time.
And who controls what kind of information you put in there?
Precisely.
The question is, and we see it in this culture and in these times, is that not necessarily what is right for you is right for me. When I was raised, when you were raised, when we were in our times, there was a clear definition what was right and what was wrong. Right now, I don't know what an influencer is telling my kids, and if I am not around, if I am not putting something there, that glass is going to fill out with something. something else,
Yeah.
and not necessarily is in the best interest of that child.
There are major consequences for this. And it's not like, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, we didn't have trauma or we didn't have problems. Children always have had, to deal with issues, and trauma has always been there. But how we handle it and the permission that we have to talk about emotions, to talk about pain, to talk about these childhood experiences has to be, we're at a stage when we know for sure how that impacts the person's life, how you make decisions about that, how you relate to others about it, how much you use violence or communication, or how you relate empathy, compassion. These are all, skills that we need to develop early on. And if we don't have the playground to develop empathy, compassion, communication, understanding, then what happens?
Now, what you think is, in your opinion, we as parents, educators, administrators in schools, people involved in the raising of the next generation, what you think is, what are we missing on all this?
I think that right now there's such high demand and high expectations of each of us as adults. For example, I work with parents that are completely overwhelmed. They lost touch with who they are as parents, of their intuition of what is right and what is wrong. We are having teachers that have so much paperwork, so much administrative, so many skills and demands as teachers that they lose touch with the kid that they have in front of them. We live in a society that is overstimulated, that is bombarded with constant information, and there's no really a true space for real connection with another human being. So I think we're losing a little bit of that humanity touch.
Human touch.
Yeah, that human connection. I truly worry about that. We're living in very uncertain times now, globally, not just in schools, but globally, which we have leaders in our societies and in our nations that are seeing the other as the enemy constantly. Right. And to do that is because you're seeing everything that you don't agree with and you put it on the other.
Completely intolerant.
That's the word. Zero tolerance. And that intolerance because somebody else thinks differently or has a different opinion or acts differently or behaves differently doesn't mean that is a threat. Doesn't mean that you cannot have empathy and understanding.
I think it's actually necessary for for a conversation, a real true, and go to the bottom of problems and actually to advance as a society.
Yeah.
We need different opinions. I need somebody. I tell my son that my best friends are not the ones who tell me how good I do in it, are the ones who come back to me and tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Right.
Because I'm doing it wrong.
But with love.
With love, of
That with
course.
love.
But the idea is that if they told me what I'm doing wrong, it's because I'm not going to fail in purpose. It's because I don't know any better.
And because they care about you. When somebody comes to you and tells you what you're doing wrong with love, they want you to do better.
Absolutely.
Right? But when somebody's coming to you and bullying you and putting you down and insulting you and telling you like that you're rejected and discriminated against, they're not helping.
Our mission as parents is to prepare our kids for where we are not around. I'm not going to be around to defend my kids or to buy whatever they need. I need to prepare them for the time I am not around. My wife is not around. That is our mission as parents. I need to form tough individuals. Individuals can understand that life can go right and can go wrong. And this is not necessarily that you're living comfortable today means that you're going to be comfortable tomorrow. What is exactly that we need to try to change, that we can actually, as adults, and not necessarily parents of a kid, but we can do to improve what we're doing?
Yeah, I know it's a big question, and I work with, unfortunately, the consequences of schools that have gone through a lot of trauma, the kids that have gone through loss, right? We have so many examples. And yes, we can do something when things already happened, and we can talk about what we do when things already happen. But how about talking about how to prevent this, right? And to prevent that, I always say this is a responsibility that is not just the school, but it's the whole community. And I tell you why. When a kid is not doing well in our community, in our society, in our school, somebody in this community, in this society can tell that this is happening. We don't have the structure right now and the ways to pay attention enough and to give enough support and resources to these kids that are not doing well. This might be kids that have a lot of early trauma from their parents, kids that have been abandoned, rejected, bullied. Kids have been struggling with mental health issues from the beginning, like depression, psychotic episodes, other challenges.
We have kids that we found in schools and be misdiagnosed, and they have chemical imbalances in the brain,
That too, yeah.
schizophrenia, and
Right,
etc.
right.
And nobody take care of them.
Nobody takes care of them. Kids that feel so rejected and so outside of the main circle, that they don't even have the words to say how shameful they feel for not feeling a sense of belonging. And that sense of belonging, I think, is a crucial concept in allowing these kids to do better. When a kid feels rejected, ostracized, and doesn't have a sense of belonging, that actually there's a lot of studies about suicide, that the person that commits suicide usually doesn't have a sense of belonging, doesn't have the understanding that there are people that care for them, that there's no one really cares in their mind, in their perception, right?
Now, we all experience one way or another feelings of rejection and not belonging.
Yes.
I at least
We all
I
do.
can speak about
We all
me.
do. These are basic fears
feelings.
of abandonment, rejection,
Especially when you are a teenager, when you go through puberty and all
and
that.
adulthood too. Don't worry about it. That happens in adulthood.
Okay, okay. So I don't necessarily feel, my opinion, that is necessarily bad. Those are feelings that are natural.
But it's remember, it's what I told you. It's not the failure or not feeling bad. It's what you do with that.
Correct.
But if you have a 5-year-old that is feeling rejected, abandoned, and doesn't even have the words to begin to describe how he
He
feels,
don't even understand what he's
and not even
describing.
understanding, just a major pain, and there's no one around that really can teach this kid how to deal with those emotions that are painful, because we all have them. That's when the resentment and the pain and the wound becomes even harder. That's when this kid doesn't feel so much for others. This is when the kid has to be in survival mode. This is when the kid has to say, what am I doing with myself in order to survive? How do I transform this into something that makes me be tougher, or makes me be more resentful, or I'm more depressed, or life means nothing, or there's this existential place of saying nothing has meaning. Like there's so many ways that this can go wrong. You see what I'm saying? And it can start from very early on. This doesn't happen in one day. Kids are going through so much, are going through mass shootings, and they're going through so much violence and aggression. That doesn't happen in one day. This is a building up of emotions.
We witnessed this, unfortunately, this past year. We have a case in North Carolina, one of our schools, where through kids talk, tell us that one of these kids was posting with weapons and threats to school. We have the police come to school. We bring the mother. We talk to her, and we ask her where he got the weapons, and she denied everything. And it was decided to suspend the kid pending investigation. They were to the parking lot of the school, where the kid grabbed the gun that she says that she doesn't have from the driver's side, and commit suicide in the parking lot of the school. We feel that we try to prevent all this, and there's so much we can do. Monitoring social media is one of them. Learning the environment, learning the early signs, knowing the kids in your school are so important. That's why sometimes I have this conversation with parents when they say, I want a police officer in my school, but unfortunately the police is not able to put the same person all the time. Right. So how you know your school, how you know your student, how you know who is there if you're not there?
It's not necessarily the police. It's every member of the community, correct, right? It's every person there that can say, you know what, I'm worried about this kid that doesn't look so good today, or didn't have food today, or it's coming from a home that is a broken home that, might not have the support that it needs. Let's not just let it go or let it be, but really doing something about it. I mean, there's also the way in which there are certain elements in our society that really affect and influence our kids. When you have a kid growing up in front of a screen that is doing video games of shooting all day long, what do you think they're going to want to do all day long? They're going to want to shoot all day long. If you put your kid in front of a screen that says, let's learn the alphabet, they're going to want to read. And I'm not saying that's the only problem, but I've heard some of the manifestation, like the manifests and the things that people have talked about when they're doing the shootings, and they say the practices of shooting in the video games is so good that when these kids have arms in their hands, they become really experts because they've been practicing for years.
I'm more concerned is about the acceptance.
Of what?
And I tell you a perfect example. Nicholas Cruz,
Mm-hmm.
Portland, he wanna pass to history to be the one who killed the most. He wanna be remembered for what he do. He pick up Valentine's Day because it's the day of love and friendship, and because he in his mind is so sick, but in his mind he needs to be somebody, and he feels as a failure.
Right.
So when you see a Columbine, when you see Jonesboro, when you see what happened in Santa Fe, Santa Fe was a schizophrenia, but when you see what happened in Uvalde, when you see what happened in so many shootings, where the shooter wants to emulate their ethos, and their ethos are other active shooters in schools, because they feel they are nobody. I am a complete failure. This is the only thing I can do. And fortunately for law enforcement and for the people who respond to this, the level of training is so poor that they're able to eliminate that threat as quick as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So the question for me is, there is a way for us, a matrix that we can use to try to predict when one of these unfortunate kids or adults decide to become a legendary star in their own minds and go kill people.
Yeah, people ask me that all the time. In psychology, we say the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. This is how we predict. I don't know if it applies to this. I also don't want to just blame, and this is something that is my opinion, you might not agree with this, but I don't just want to blame mental health for what happens in the mass shootings.
I agree with you.
Because I have examples of people that, let's say, want to commit suicide, and they have the choice of either shooting themselves, taking a pill, jumping off of a cliff, doing, and if they don't have the arm there to shoot themselves, and they might do other things that is more preventable, they regret it. The minute they want to commit suicide, they regret and say, I'm so happy I didn't do that because I don't want to kill myself, or I want to do something different. But if you have the arm so accessible, like some of these examples that you just mentioned, there's no chance to regret it. There's no way of like doing something else because the impulsivity in the moment of grabbing what it's at hand, that it's so easily there. In some of these examples, the arms were right there in the living room a lot.
We have a couple cases in our schools of kids trying to jump from the roof of school.
No, but I'm talking about mass shootings when you want to kill somebody else, right?
It's true.
Yeah, it's like it's right there. It's like nobody's telling them not to use it. There's the example of violence is acceptable, and there's no other way of dealing with resolving an issue except with violence. I think if we try to begin to understand how we can take these kids that are suffering and that have voiced this suffering, it's not a surprise when you go through the kids and you say, "Oh, he has been posting that he's depressed, that he's sad, that nobody loves him, that he's being bullied, he doesn't have a mom, that dad is always outside." Like these are not so surprising. Every case that you see, these are kids have gone through a lot and have had certain elements that have been there. Look, they're all boys, right? I think there was one girl, but they're all boys.
There are a couple girls.
They're one girl, I think that I know.
No, there are like 2 or 3.
Okay. But look at the percentage,
Absolutely.
right? They're all between 15 and 20 something. Like there's certain profile that we can see, and
Absolutely.
all of them have major issues at home, major, and not necessarily because they have mental health, meaning they're not schizophrenic, they're not hospitalized. They have major issues that have to do with lack of stability, lack of connection, lack of empathy, lack of guidance.
Correct.
Nobody wanted to do anything about it. These are kids that maybe have been even had set some alarm in the system, say like, hey, this kid needs help. Hey, this kid needs some intervention.
What happened with Nicholas Cruz?
Exactly. He needed some intervention. I don't know if the system is so overwhelmed that it cannot provide the help.
Let me tell you something that I see as a parent. I saw a lot of teachers and educators who are overwhelmed with work and have multiple classes and a lot of paperwork, and they are, I don't know if conscious or unconsciously, pay no attention to the kids.
Right.
Except that the parents are involved in this and the parents are complaining. So they are obligated to go and answer. So those kids who parents are involved tend to be better treated in school by teachers And not bully but teacher, because I saw teachers bullying kids.
Right.
That's another phenomenon.
That's true.
I
That's
saw
so true.
kids, and not because the teacher doesn't know any better, but it's that the teacher was bullied by itself, by the parents, by the peers, and growing
But
up.
so you see how this is a system problem, and this
It's
is
a school full cycle.
and not only that, I agree so much with like involving the parents in the responsibility. No kid, that's another thing I want to clarify, and you might not agree, but no kid is born being a shooter.
Absolutely agree
No
with
kid
you.
is born, right?
Absolutely agree with
Being
you.
aggressive or being a killer or being wanting to commit suicide or wanting to kill
Absolutely.
somebody. So that's something we need to understand. What happened in the life of this kid?
What
that we got to this
information you put
extreme?
in that glass.
Yes, exactly.
Correct.
Exactly.
I agree with you
So it's a
100%.
responsibility of a system, and there's something wrong with the system that we're getting to this extreme, because these are extremes responses. A 15-year-old wanting to kill is an extreme response.
Now, and I do an extensive investigation. I come from the school that believe that data and the past will tell me the trends that are going to go in the future.
Exactly. So we're in the same school.
Correct. So school shooting in the United States, 1764, and then you have school shootings all the way, different motives. Most of us, in my investigation, I saw most of the shootings between the 1700s and the early 1900s and the early 20s were all related to issues happening in school, sexual issues, violence because of sexual nature. So we have this prevalence until we go to the early 20s, and then we go to the First World War. And we have a peak, believe it or not, and we notice a peak between wars. First World War, we have immediately after that, we have a peak in violence.
Wow.
And then we go to Second World War, and we have a huge peak in violence. And then we go Korea, we have people coming back, peak in violence. We have one in Vietnam. We have one after the Gulf War. The other thing that we see is after 1992, we introduce a concept of mental health.
That it's like we cannot use that fit and use it as the explanation for everything. We cannot have, oh, mental health is the explanation for everything. I don't agree with that. Yes.
I agree with you.
Yeah. It's like saying, every time I get interviewed in one of these shootings, okay, but Dr. Shiro, it's a mental health issue. I'm like, no, it's mental health issue with many other variables that we need to take. You cannot blame it on mental health only.
I don't think there's a solution for these events.
Yeah.
Then it's a single solution. I don't believe in just take this pill and you're gonna be cured.
Exactly.
I think it's such a big, complex problem that really needs a multitude of answers to prevent it.
Exactly. I'm so happy we agree on that.
Yes.
Because not everybody can see the whole picture like that. There are all these elements that are happening at the same time.
Correct.
It's the parental control, it's the teachers, it's the mental health, it's the early traumas in life, it's how the culture, shapes these kids, it's the permission to use violence and arms, in a way that is permissible. There's all these elements that are not being dealt with.
I completely agree with you. There's not a single culprit on what's going on. Or I think we are still missing a lot of elements in this big picture, because we haven't talked about adults committing all these crimes, which are also exist. We have cases, for example, in China recently, when we have a teacher getting a knife and try to kill the kids. We haven't even talked about terrorism yet, which is is an element that we have to be prepared for. Because recently we have this video. I watched a video from Al Qaeda, and they make a mock-up of a school in the United States. And you know what they did? They take the mock-up kids all the way to the roof so they can execute it, so the helicopters of the news can see it getting executed.
No way.
I really appreciate what you're doing.
No.
I really do, because I think we all professionals and deal with education and everything else. This should be our star goal. Let me understand the psychology of this.
Yes.
The psychology of the violence, the psychology of how we get into this. Now, before we go, I need to ask you, healing. We all have PTSD in our lives.
Yeah.
We don't have to be enrolling and go to war to experience PTSD. Talk to us about that. Healing.
So I have a 5-stage model that I propose in order to heal and grow from all this trauma. But the first step and the most important is radical acceptance. It's really what we're doing, you and I, right now, which is accepting this is a reality, or for the kid to accept they're being traumatized, or for the adult to say, I am depressed. Instead of pretending, instead of coming up with excuses, instead of like using addiction and other behaviors to cover the real problem, or to put like
Band-Aid.
a band-aid that doesn't, to really look at yourself in the mirror and say, okay, what's really going on? What's really going on? And not just as an individual, but as a community or as a group or as a family. When you really call it for what it is, when you really have radical honesty into the issue, into the wound, into the real pain, instead of pretending, that's when you get into the journey of healing. And there are 4 other steps that I can tell you. This is what we have. This is, people were telling me, I did, but now you're going to have AI as a psychology. And I said, you know what? AI can be all it wants, but the humanity that I have, AI cannot replicate. The empathy in a way that is real, truly human. So my invitation really in healing is to allow for these spaces of acceptance, of recognition, of validation.
To help us understand what is the difference between sympathy and empathy.
Yes. Sympathy is when you are feeling sorry for the person that just lost a loved one, when you're being there with the other person in a painful situation. Empathy, I think it's a little bit deeper, is truly connecting from your own feelings that can relate to the other person.
When I was in Israel and I learned this, I feel sympathy for my people. I feel sympathy for for you. I feel sympathy from Henry. I feel sympathy for my wife, for my people, even to my enemies. I feel empathy for them. You know what empathy tells me? Empathy helped me be in their shoes.
Exactly.
And I can predict how they're going to act.
Exactly.
I feel empathy even for the terrorists before they're going to do attack, because it helped me be in their mind and see the world the way they see it, so I can predict what the next move is going to be.
We need empathy in this world so much, and not only empathy but compassion, which is again some of the same, like really truly honoring that feeling, that what you're feeling, what the other person is feeling. And like what we said, I think it's empathy, compassion that gives you tolerance for the other. Because I'm empathic to how you feel, I can tolerate, even if I disagree, but I can tolerate how you're seeing the world.
I want you to tell me how you see the world, so I can see where you're coming with this.
Definitely.
So we can talk it out instead of going to war. I completely agree with you.
Exactly.
Is there anything else that you want to leave us with this in this conversation?
Yeah, I think that one thing to really remember is that each and every one of us has a role in this. That there's no such thing as you being indifferent with what happens. When you're being a good parent, you're creating a better place in humanity. When you're when you're teaching your children how to resolve conflict, how to face failure, how to deal with difficult situations, you're already creating a new humanity. When you're being a good teacher, when you're being a good friend, when you're being empathic with your friends, with your spouses, with your children, you're already doing something. And when you're being a professional that really truly wants to make a difference, that's even better. So I think that there's no such thing these days of not having a conscious of who we are and what we're doing. So having consciousness, being responsible for our actions, for our decisions, we have to take it seriously, and hopefully it'll take us to a world with more peace, more happiness, more love, and more understanding.
Edith, thank you very much for being here today. We learned so much. There's so much that we can do to help our kids, and I want to let you and the people who see us with this. We're not here to save goods or valuables. We're here to save lives, and that is our mission. I think it's the mission of educators, is to form the next generation, the future of this country. But it's a good future, a future of loving people, good citizens, people who empathize, and people who sympathize with their the fellow citizen and the fellow human being. Thank you very much.
It's my honor, and I hope this brings hope, and that there's growth, and there's wisdom, and there's really something better to look forward to.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom for us. Thank you very much.